Someone famously said, KRs are a tool, they're not a weapon, right? So I think you want to use them as a tool that serves the business. And I think it's, in my mind, sort of short-sighted if you don't adjust them to meet where the business is at.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
What's up, everybody? CJ Gustafson, the host of Run the Numbers. I just interviewed Bryan Morris, the CFO of Demandbase, and we go deep. I'm talking real deep on OKRs. Okay, so before we know it, 2025 will be here. You're going to be digging into planning season. How do you set the right OKRs? Should all company level OKRs have derivatives at the department level? Why OKRs fail? Why OKRs lose momentum, and how Bryan feels about changing them mid-year, and tactically how to track them. What pane of glass are you looking at? Is it in slides? Is it in an actual tool built for it? We talk about why Bryan is a big fan of weekly written team updates, how to run a good exec update call. I know a lot of us have calls on Monday with the C-suite where we go through a laundry list of items, how to avoid it just being a CYA call where everyone's just like, let me ramble off a list of things I'm working on. We talk about talent management. Bryan's a huge fan of personality tests. It was pretty cool to hear the different tests that he's used and what they unlock and what you can learn about people that you work with. And then we speak to the talent management side. That's, not always as fun, moving people out when it's not working, the best way to frame up a difficult conversation, and how long it should take between knowing that someone isn't a good fit and actually moving them out. Bryan has some strong opinions on software decisions. So what level of decision-making should CFOs have on the overall org's tooling and software stack, and some of the hidden costs of choosing the wrong tech. This was a pleasure of a podcast. Bryan is one of the more thoughtful people I've had on, and a really clear thinker. It was a pleasure to speak with him. Hey, there are a couple listeners out there drinking some ice cold coffee. Could be something else too. Out of Run the Numbers Yeti mugs. If you go to your team, your company's Teams or Slack thingamabob, and put in a large group chat and say, hey, I love the Run the Numbers podcast. Here's the link. Check it out. I'll send you a Yeti mug, a branded Yeti mug. CJ@mostlymetrics.com. Send me a pic. I'll hook you up with something to have those beverages out of. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and Seeky choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. leapfin.com. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Oh yeah! Go to planful.com/metrics to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Planful. That's planful.com/metrics. Bryan, thanks for joining me on the Run the Numbers podcast.
Super glad to be here, CJ.
We were joking before we started that you have a plant that's been alive for 3 weeks now behind you. Is that right?
Yeah, 3 weeks. So I'm pretty proud of myself. Normally, they don't get too old before they have issues.
I'm fitting out a new office myself, and I'm in the throes of trying to decide if I'm going to go with all the fake plants or if I'm actually going to bet on myself that I can keep a couple cacti alive.
Yeah, I sort of hedge my bets a little bit. I've got a couple fake ones just to make sure get some greenery, no matter how I manage them.
This is just how I start the podcast. But speaking of goals, the first topic we actually wanted to talk about were OKRs. And right now we're recording this at the end of July. We're soon going to be rolling into August, which is annual planning season for a lot of people. It sounds so weird to say that. You make it like halfway through the year and you start thinking about the next one. But for people who are going to dust off those pencils and get into planning season, how do you think about OKRs when you're kicking things off?
Yeah, they've been an important part of my career, I'd say, for the last 10 plus years. And every company does it a little different. So whether you use OKRs or another system, I think the key thing in advance of kicking off a financial planning process is making sure whatever you have strategy wise for the upcoming year connects to some sort of an operating framework. Often those are in the form of OKRs, and that you can use that framework to begin to provide clarity initially to the executive team, ultimately to the company around what's most important. I think OKRs work best when there's this combination of focus and commitment that you're establishing at the beginning of the year.
That totally makes sense. And I've been thinking through past annual planning processes, what we got right, what we got wrong. And I think the ones that went right, the OKRs did start, at least in draft version, with the CEO and CFO and linking it back to the operating plan for like an actual tangible outcome that we could measure.
Yeah, I think that's right, because there's always that arm wrestle around resources that you're going to have. But if you put your company objectives in a clear way where they're not so ambitious that you might have some kind of crazy ask from the business in return, I think there's this sort of balancing act you have of creating something that's credible, but also fits within the financial envelope, so to speak. And that's, often takes weeks and months to get to. So I think the earlier you start it in advance of the fiscal year, the better you're off.
Bryan, is there a magic number when it comes to OKRs? Like there should be 3, there should be 5. Like is 10 too many?
I think it's a good question. So, and this kind of gets to the, how you maybe layer this across the org. Right. I think at the company level, I like to see like 4 kind of objectives with some KRs that hang off of that, call it 3 to 5. So no more than that, ideally. But then at the department level, I think that's where a similar concept generally applies. Where I've seen companies kind of get into trouble is where it becomes a little bit of a vanity contest around how many you can do. And, whether they're actually measurable and good KRs is sort of a related question.
Yeah. And so you have an objective and then you have a key result. And maybe sometimes I've got wrapped around the wheel when I've tried to make everything like perfectly symmetrical, where like the CEO has 4 objectives and I'm going to have 4 derivatives of those exact objectives. And then I'm going to have 4 key results measured off of that. And I think then I'm actually just like, I don't know, I'm basically just creating a book report instead of actually like coming up with something for the purpose of why we're doing it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've been through that same kind of dilemma before. And I think some of this comes down to whether you kind of adopt more of an aligned view of OKRs versus like what you might call a cascading one. A cascading one would be sort of that mimicking of the company level KRs at each department level. Whereas an aligned view, you can kind of tie back to a company KR, but it doesn't need to be fully mapped, especially for us in kind of the back office. I think it's very hard sometimes to tie to some of the company level ones, if it's customer related, for example, or innovation related. So I think as long as you've got kind of a loose alignment, I think that works.
Yeah, I've also seen like the engineering department struggle to create direct derivatives if it's like a sales goal.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. Although it's funny, the salespeople want them to kind of tie into.
Oh yeah, how are you going to give me stuff to sell?
Totally. I think the biggest thing on the engineering side that I see is that there's kind of this notion of, committed key results versus aspirational ones. And the whole premise around KRs is create a mix of both so that you get the right kind of reaching within a quarter for what actually can be done. And I think with engineering teams, there's often this debate around, all right, so I see it on the roadmap. Is that committed in Q2 or is it aspirational? And so I think if you can provide clarity there via OKRs, I think you're doing something impactful.
Bryan, I got to ask you, as a CFO, do you think it's a good idea to verbally set stretch goals for like a sales team? Like you said, you may have this key result of say, our quota or the goal we're going after is 100 million, but this quarter, I'm just using round numbers, the stretch is 125. Do you feel like when you set stretch goals and you put them out into the universe, it usually ends up being a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends on the degree of stretch. In general, I think you should have stretch goals across the sales team. In other words, the roll up on quota will be meaningfully different than what you present in your board plan. So there's kind of this cascading effect from like individual contributor to, sales leadership teams to maybe board plans, or ultimately if you're a public company, a street plan. So I think the concept of stretch makes a lot of sense to me. I think how you implement it and where you set those kind of tolerances are important, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to confuse the team on what the goal is, right? But it's okay to acknowledge that as a team, we may have a goal that's slightly different than our board plan. And you might have things like compensation that hang off like a sales set of goals that are slightly different than maybe your board approved plan. And I found that to be effective as long as you can kind of create a simplicity around how those are different and an understanding of why that's important and why you're doing it.
Would you call that overassignment?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. It's funny. I got a text from my friend who's a CFO this morning, and he's stepping into a new company. And he said, "Hey, is there any gap between the board plan and management's plan of what they're measured against? Because there are a lot of people in the C-suite who are measured against bonuses." And I said, usually those are the same, but then you over deploy at each level after that. But you want your board plan, and this is just one guy's view of the world, you want your board plan to be the same as what the C-suite is measured against, so you can communicate to them pretty clearly without having to do like a weird song and dance of if you're hitting the target or not.
I think that's right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Bryan, in your experience setting and measuring OKRs, when and where do they fail?
Yeah, I think where they fail often is when they're not very clear. So KRs, kind of the, how you're going to do it, how you're going to measure success, often can be too vague. So, for example, one of the classic ones is like, launch tool ABC as a Q3 KR. If you just stop there, you stop short of understanding whether you were successful, because, you might want to include things like enabling all users around the tool. You might want to make sure that it's integrated with another key system. And so by just saying, launching a tool, you sort of stop short of clarity around what that exactly means. And as a leader, you don't want to have a lack of clarity at the end of the quarter, whether you met, your key result or not. So I think it's kind of just pressure testing the objectivity of the KR and whether everyone understands as you get to the end of the quarter, will you know if you succeeded or not? So I'd say that's one obvious one. I'd say, the other one is just around not putting in kind of the clarity around key dates and measurements, right? I think generally, if you have a line of sight on when you'd want to deliver something by, you want to put that date in there. And so that's another one. And then maybe the last one I'll mention is just, and this happens a lot with, I think, finance teams, where there's kind of this business as usual KR that they'll put up there. Like, never do you want your accounting team saying, for Q3, I'm going to close the books in July, August, and September. That's just normal course of business stuff. You want the kind of incremental things that you're doing to sort of supercharge execution. So it's not about how many, it's about doing things that are kind of incrementally meaningful for the business as opposed to just a checklist of what you'd normally do. So, by extension, I tend to have less expectations around KRs on like GL teams, for example. They probably have less percentage of their day that's allocated to implementing new tools or optimizing new workflows. That might be dramatically different than like a RevOps team who is, doing things that are maybe more project oriented through the year.
That's an amazing overview. I've found that the checklist is very common for people in G&A functions. They're basically just naming off the things they do normally that are table stakes to keep the lights on, where you can go that extra level and define what success looks like. So if instead of close the books faster, it's take our close from 11 business days to 8, and then every quarter like have 1 day less, something like that.
For sure. That's a great KR for an accounting team, for sure.
Another one that we had set this year was to take our days payable outstanding, basically take our collections down from, I'll just use numbers like from 40 days to 32 days or something like that. And it actually got people excited because we would like be on the edge of our seats. You can imagine how nerdy we are, checking if we hit it that month. And what you'd said about dates is pretty powerful because sometimes people just float into like the ether, like by the end of Q3. And it's like, well, that's kind of like, can we just be more specific around a date? Maybe we put like an actual date in there.
For sure. Because, if you have 3 projects that are kind of in parallel and you've got different milestones along the way, it's sort of unrealistic to assume you're going to get the big work done in the last 2 weeks of the quarter, right? Ideally, there's sort of mid-quarter check-ins, and you're accomplishing big chunks of that as you get through a quarter.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. Quick math, the less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. And back by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That is netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please do it, guys. I really need this. Annual planning season is upon us. That's right, my favorite time of year. And it's not just about setting goals for the coming year. It's about ensuring you have the right tools in place to measure and achieve those goals. As a SaaS CFO, I know having access to reliable, real-time metrics is crucial for my annual planning process. That's why I'm so excited to partner with today's sponsor, Maxio. Maxio is a billing and financial operations platform that helps subscription businesses reconcile bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, and SaaS metrics automatically. By the way, guys, bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, not the same thing. Got to get them straight. Because these numbers are the foundation of your financial models, it's important to have quick access and trust that they are correct. Don't let the complexities of SaaS finance and accounting slow you down. If you want to start 2025 with the right tools, check out Maxio by visiting maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Request a demo through our link to support the podcast, ya boy, and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. maxio.com/run the numbers. Please, guys, I really need this. And like I said, we're recording this kind of in the August timeframe. And I do feel that OKRs tend to lose momentum around now when companies start to see they won't hit something, or maybe they set the OKR in a way that is slightly different than how they currently measure reality. They just didn't know that this is how the business would function. So they just stopped talking about it. So how do you feel about adjusting objectives or key results throughout, like during the year?
I think going back to what I said, I think a key function of KRs is providing commitment and focus for teams. And so if there's sort of a decommit, if you will, during the year for very good reasons, like perhaps the business is deprioritizing a certain product line or a certain go-to-market motion, I think it's very valid to adjust your KRs, probably mid-year. Is sort of the natural time to do it. But I think it should be transparent and evident that you're doing that. And then you don't kind of bury it around why you're doing it because it's important to the business. So I do think that it's okay to change KRs. I think someone famously said, KRs are a tool. They're not a weapon, right? So I think you want to use them as a tool that serves the business. And I think it's, in my mind, sort of short-sighted if you don't adjust them to meet where the business is at. As CFOs, we always have our annual plan, which is sort of immovable. And at some level, you're, as a fiduciary of the business, you're responsible for reporting against. But the KRs, the kind of operating motion that you use to achieve your best results, I think those can and should evolve if something material happens.
I'll admit it, I'm guilty of having like an OKR do the Irish exit where in Q2 it's on the slide and there are 4 of them. And then in Q3 you get there, there's only 3 there and you just don't address it. So that's a shortcoming of mine in the past before.
That's the beauty of using something like Google Sheets. It's like, where to go? Well,
okay. So that was my next question, actually. Tactically, where do you like to track OKRs for the company?
Oh man, this is a tough one. So admittedly at Demandbase, today we use Google Sheets, but I will tell you, given just the size of the business and the number of people involved, and frankly, the number of people that have kind of edit rights to a doc kind of a thing, I think it can become a bit unruly. So I'd say we're in the process of evaluating a couple tools that would help us manage it better next year. But at the moment, it's Google Sheets.
Yeah, I think we did ours in Google Sheets, and then it actually ended up in our HRIS. Hi, Bob, because that's where we're doing performance management. But we're probably going to be inundated by BDRs who are sending us the next solution that we can use to keep track of our OKRs now.
That's right, exactly.
In addition to OKRs, you told me you were a big fan of weekly written team updates. Can you speak to how those work?
Yeah, so one of the things we do at the executive team is we have a weekly management update where we do 3 things with one another. So at least 24 hours in advance of getting together and our weekly ET meetings, we'll share 3 things with our teammates. One is anything that we've made progress on in the last week or observations from the last week. And those could be, big, small, very casual. By the way, this is all kind of team confidential. So lots of times you'll have like people related things show up on these updates. So key observations and accomplishments for the week. That's one. The second one is challenges. You can have nothing in this box or you could have 3 things depending on how your week's going. But key challenges that you've experienced across the team or the business. And then the third bucket is what you plan to do for the week ahead. So call it a mini set of KRs, if you will, for what you want to accomplish for the week ahead. So it's for me, it's a really helpful, like just grounding exercise around the things I want to do. And then I try to tie that back to my kind of daily to-do list.
And then do you fill this all out in slides or something, or is it an email that you do reply all to the management team?
No, we use Google Sheets. And so very collaborative. Everyone kind of fills it out. Some will do it sort of, many days in advance. Some will kind of get it in just before the deadline. But the key thing is if you take the 5 to 10 minutes to read it across the team, you have a really good glimpse into what your colleagues are going through and how things are going. And so for me, it's kind of a shorthand way of catching up with my colleagues. And then, time permitting during the meeting, you can kind of double click on something, that's more interesting to you and kind of have a conversation as a team about it.
I'm curious, are there any formats that you think are good for those staff team meetings? Because there is the tendency for them to just devolve into like almost like a CYA where you're just like giving updates on what you've worked on, and it's just not that helpful anymore.
Oh, yeah. There's lots of books and different thinking on this. And I think it's very company specific. What I don't like, CJ, myself, is kind of the round the table readouts.
Yep.
What I just described in terms of a written pre-read, the reason I think that's really effective is because you get some of those really
get it out.
You get it out. And then if someone thinks something's really important, you can go a little deeper, which is cool. But I think what I've seen work the best is at least once a month, you're devoting a review to more of an operating kind of readout. So here's how we did for the month. Like we do a flash report where we'll talk about, bookings and P&L and cash and all that good stuff. So do that once a month and reserve, 20 minutes or however long you need for that. And then I think, just situational related updates have been kind of the mode we've been in. So, you definitely want to revisit certain things as you kind of find things maybe taking too long, too much of e-staff. I think the pitfall we've been struggling with a little bit more lately is having kind of maybe more growth specific updates come in through e-team and it not applying to everyone there. And so we're trying to find the right balance of updates within e-team versus, discrete meetings with maybe a smaller subset of folks.
Yeah. And I've had the problem recently where the meetings are just like, here's a laundry list of things I've worked on over the last week, and it ends up being backwards looking. And then to your point, there's like not really time to discuss it on the call because everybody's just going through a list and it may not be relevant. So I've been trying to think through what the best structures are. And I've also tried to be more, prescriptive and say, hey, on this week, the guy from business development is going to come and give an update on X, Y, and Z. But by the time you get to that week, Bryan, it's like not even relevant to what's going on, but you have this person coming to present. So it's kind of like, what's the balance between people just showing up and talking about what they're working on versus trying to script out or plan out and schedule what the soup du jour of the day is going to be in like a month?
Yeah, no, it's really hard. I think there's cultures where I think they do a really good job of kind of the pre-read and context setting for anyone coming in. So I'm a big fan of if someone's going to come in and present, ideally they're sharing context ahead of that, where it doesn't need to be a 12 or 25 page slide readout. It can be a little more conversational around what they've shared in advance. And that tends to work well when you have the time to do it.
How do you think topics for this should bubble up? Should it be the CEO kind of saying the week before, hey, next week, let's talk about this? Or is it kind of people maybe emailing to the broader group, hey, so Sally's working on this. Can she come and talk about it?
I think it's kind of 80-20. I would say 80% CEO directed and then 20% crowdsourced is probably the right approach.
That's good. Bryan, I want to transition to a different topic, and that's talent management. And so you told me that you're a fan of personality tests. To be more specific, are there like names of tests out there? Is there one called like the Rorsch test or something like that? Like what are the personality tests that you like?
Yeah, there's definitely a few of them out there, and there's frameworks for assessing, personality traits. So Myers-Briggs is one that many have done over time. I've done some other ones. The one that I've used, I would say the most over the last 10 years or so is called the Enneagram. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it
No.
at all, but essentially it after you self-assess and fill out a number of different questions, you sort of fall into one of 9 types. And then based upon that type, there's certain things that tend to be true about that type. And so what I found really effective is when you do it at the team level and you sort of go through everyone's types, there tends to be a lot of head nodding around, oh, that makes sense. And there's these headliners around the different types. Like I'm a 3, which is a pragmatic achiever. And so, there's sort of the strengths and the pitfalls of a given type. And so you go around the table, and oftentimes you can, I think, learn a lot about others through that exercise. So typically it works best when you have a facilitator, whether that's third party or maybe someone on your learning and development team is an expert in the methodology. But it's really great way, I think, to ground yourself in maybe a longer form setting, perhaps an offsite, where you can talk about kind of the validation of the type and what it might mean for how you work most effectively with someone else on the team.
Do you think personality tests are best for getting to know your peers? Is that the objective usually?
I think it's for getting to know your peers. I do it with my direct reports too, to make sure I understand kind of the communication styles that work best for them. So I think it's peers. It's not so much about putting someone in a box, that is understanding the nuances of different types and how someone might show up a little stronger in a certain way. And you're like, oh yeah, that kind of aligns with their type. But it also maybe helps you be more informed in terms of how to best deal with them, right?
Right.
Like there's certain types that can come off as very kind of intimidating or challenging. And it's not because they're trying to be intimidating. It's just that's their most effective way of communicating. And, I think some people, without understanding that, might feel intimidated and be less apt to be direct with them, where it's with those types, they're the least sensitive to direct feedback, and having a healthy debate is actually really, really productive for them. So I think just understanding that everyone has different nuances and then trying to work kind of with the type, I think is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I worked with somebody once who gave me like a user manual for how to work with Pat. He was Pat. And it went through like, these are the ways that I usually communicate. These are the hours I work and stuff. And it was weird at first to read. Like, am I reading like how to work this new refrigerator I bought? But the more I thought about it, I was like, this is perfect. Like, I know when to email this person. I know what they mean when they're saying one thing and what like the context may be behind it or the emotion. So I found that pretty helpful too.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, it's kind of the same thing I try to do when I do a reference check on someone, is like understand in advance, like how they best thrive at what they do. And sometimes it's how to communicate with them. Some people tend to be a little more long-winded, some are more direct, some are, hyper organized. So just understanding all those things, I think allows you to be a more effective leader.
Bryan, have you ever used personality tests in the interview process?
Not in an interview process, but I would say I definitely go through my own like kind of list of key soft skills that I tend to bias around. So I've never actually took someone through specific questions related to a personality test per se, but I'm definitely filtering for certain skills.
Are there any skills that you'd be willing to share that maybe other CFOs listening could jot down to screen for?
Oh yeah, I don't know that it's super original, but I tend to, on the soft skills side, I tend to really screen for attitude, judgment, and intellectual curiosity. Those are 3 things that are kind of always top of my list. And they tend to, I think, work well across levels and functions. Generally in any growth stage company, you're going to want people who you're going to trust putting in situations that they're going to be asked to make decisions where they can't bubble it up to you. And so having impeccable judgment and trusting that person is really important to me. So I love that. And then just the nature of being in tech and the ups and downs that you deal with, I think having a positive attitude goes a long way. And yeah, so those are a couple of things that I really focus on.
That's awesome. I'm going to write those three down. Speaking of the ups and downs, we do operate in a world that has lots of peaks and valleys. The other side of talent management is moving people out when it's not working. Do you have any tips, frameworks, advice for how to start a conversation with somebody when it's not working?
There's the old adage, feedback is a gift. And I think that's true. I think when something isn't working out, the first step is making sure the person knows about it and how they might correct the situation, right? So I think feedback should be given on an ongoing basis and in a sort of a constructive framework, right? Oftentimes when there's a mismatch with expectations around the role and the performance, oftentimes it's coachable. So ideally, you're able to coach someone up when something isn't going really well. That's of course the ideal, is that it's coachable and you can kind of work with them over time and you see improvement. I think when it's not going well, if it's egregious, it's a cultural norm or something ethical, then I think you have to move really fast in those kind of situations. But I think if it's something that maybe just isn't improving, then I think it's kind of a series of consistent feedback that ultimately leads to probably an action that's not surprising ultimately to you or the person involved.
And that's something that I think I've struggled with. And it's that in-between zone where it's not like they committed fraud or it's not something where they said something bad. It's just not at the level that you expected it to be at. And I try to ask myself, how long should it take for you to get from sensing it to actually taking that action?
Yeah, I've struggled with it too. I mean, I think it's very situational. A lot of times when you're talking about resources, it's not like we have someone waiting in the wings who can do that exact role right away if you take someone out of the business. So there's sort of this, switching costs, if you will, and timing that you have to consider. So I think at the end of the day, for me, it's very important to be thoughtful and really use the appropriate humility and humanity around sharing the situation with the person. And when done right, you can do that over the course of many weeks or months even, and still get to a result where they're parting ways with the business. And it feels like, you've been a good partner in that regard, even though at the end of the day, it's probably the right answer for both them and the business to part ways. So I don't know that there's a perfect answer around, what it is. I think it's more that how you do it that's important.
Yeah, it's that period of time where I think then and they know that it's not going to work out, and you're trying to figure out the best way to give them an on-ramp with humility, an off-ramp with humility in it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then I think the other piece of it, which sometimes we lose sight of, is everyone's watching, right? When someone's not doing their job, their peers kind of know it. And so as a leader, you have to be appreciative of the fact that if everyone's rowing the boat at a certain pace and someone isn't kind of pulling their weight, the eyes are kind of on you if someone's sort of lingering.
That's an excellent call out, that it's not just you that notices, it's the other people around.
Definitely.
To transition to a different topic, I wanted to speak about software decisions. And this is always a hot button topic because CFOs, it's also interesting because CFOs that I talk to a lot of time, like yourself, they occupy this unique position where they're both the buyers and sellers of software. So they have this nice vantage point of both sides of the table. But what level of decision making do you think CFO should have on the overall org's tooling and software stacks? Not just finances stuff, but everyone's stuff.
You need to set the right materiality threshold for your business in terms of when a CFO might get involved for a given purchase. In today's world, with the proliferation of SaaS tools, a 750 person business can have over 100 tools, right? And so,
Easy.
A tool for every handful of people easily. And so you don't want to get involved in every decision, but I think the ones that have both dollar and what I would call integration materiality. So when tools are being integrated with other key tools, maybe like a CRM or a ERP, I think there's a higher bar for that tool and maybe a need for the CFO to get a better understanding. One of the things I've seen with SaaS tools is that they're easy to get into and sometimes they're easy to get out of. But sometimes, depending on the contract you strike, they can be easy to get into, but hard to get out of. And so that's one of, I think, the biggest pitfalls around the decentralization of buying of these tools is, you don't always get the right deal on the front end.
Well, maybe you could expand upon that. So other than just the cost, the dollars or the sticker price of stuff, what other things should CFOs think about when it comes to buying tech?
If something is an important tool for a function, let's say it's integrated in a few different ways and it's material enough, one of the things that I want to see as CFO is I want to see the right amount of commitment at the executive level around the tool. Meaning it's not, someone, a couple clicks down in the org saying, hey, I want to make this tool and implement it. And maybe they're the only one that's demoed it. I want there to be executive level buy-in because we arguably are making an investment decision around something that, based upon how we're going to implement it, should be a multi-year commitment of the org. And so depending on how it's going to be implemented and the workflows, I would say I try to level up the approval within the org and get, one of my executive colleagues buy-in that this is indeed the right tool. We looked at 3 other tools. And if not, it's a good way for me to kind of push back on them a little bit and say, well, give me your perspective on what are the other tools that are, potentially viable here and why they're not the ones. Sometimes I understand those tools, sometimes I don't, but I think it's a fair question to ask if it kind of falls into that material set of tools discussion.
So just to flag for the other people listening, a good question to ask is, what else did you look at, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that's right.
I think like you said, an engineering tool, like me trying to look at GitHub versus GitLab, I'm probably not going to have the best perspective on it, but it does uncover a level of rigor in their process for evaluating it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the other thing too is I'm trying to be better at this. So I want to be self-aware around it, but whenever you ask other businesses, parts of the business rather, what they're going to get out of the tool, like what are your key success criteria? Oftentimes it'll be things like, this role is going to spend less time doing manual tasks and it'll free up 20% of their time, or it'll make our SDR motion a little bit more efficient. And so you can kind of capture those things ideally on the front end. And then if you're really good, you can revisit that a year later and actually try to hold the businesses accountable around what they thought they were buying the tool for versus, where they actually ended up. And I think that's kind of the higher ground of, tool purchasing, is sort of like validating what you really bought the tool for in the first place is actually happening. Admittedly, it's very hard to do. And I know I've not done enough of that over time, but I think that's the ideal for sure.
Do you have any strong opinions on tool consolidation, like at the CFO level, if you should try to consolidate on one vendor versus let people pick whatever they think is best?
I try not to get too micromanaging around that stuff. I think tool consolidation often is a function of the category and what happens over time. What I'm more sensitive to, CJ, is maybe a point tool in marketing is a great place to pick on because there's such a proliferation of these like one-off MarTech tools.
Yeah.
Like a point tool in marketing where there's a 3-year commitment being made by someone, a mid-level manager. And that's a bit of a red flag for me because without knowing the company's kind of funding history, their outlook, I don't know that I want to lock us in for 3 years. So I might be more apt to make that a 1-year purchase and, test that a little bit more. So I think it kind of depends on the maturity of the tool often. Yeah.
We were talking to Rob Goldenberg, the CFO of Sixth Sense, and he was explaining that he actually thinks that CFOs saying we have to if Salesforce offers this too, and it's 80% is good, we should go with Salesforce. So we just have one vendor. He was saying he actually thinks that's not a great thing for the org, because it sometimes forces people to use tools that they didn't really want in the first place. Like, hey, we need something that does what HubSpot does, but this other company, we can buy two things on the same platform, maybe get a better deal. Then they feel like you're almost forcing something down their throat.
It kind of speaks to the innovation at a given business and how you think about it, right? Often, if you have innovation as a cultural norm or value, there tends to be more of a bias towards the earlier stage innovative tools and testing those. AI is a great example of a class of tools where there's a lot of exploration and discovery going on right now. But yeah, I think if you have that as part of a core value, then you tend to have, I would say, kind of counter intuitive or inertia-based decision-making happening.
And it's getting even tougher, right? Because with AI and how fast it's moving, you want to avoid buyer's remorse. Like, you don't want to buy something for 2-year deal and in 6 months, something better comes out.
No doubt, because the speed of innovation there is tremendous.
What are some of the hidden costs of choosing the wrong technology? So not just overpaying for something, but are there other things that can go wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, with the sprawl of SaaS tooling, you want to prevent against underutilization and overcommitting, as much as possible. So there's kind of the financial sunk costs. I think whenever you put something in, there's the cost of actually implementing it, and if it doesn't go well, then there's the switching cost on the back end. And I think getting back to my earlier point is sometimes when you have dynamic leadership environments and you've got a multi-year deal in place, sometimes you've burdened the next wave of leadership with a tool that may not be fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think you want to be careful about that. Back to my point around commitment, I think it's good to have commitment at multiple levels in the org so that you don't have a new leader come in and sort of wholly, need to kind of change things up in a pretty inefficient way.
Yeah, said in a less diplomatic way, you hire a new CMO or a new salesperson, like, they're going to want their stuff. They're going to want whatever they're comfortable with. And so you don't want to overly burden them with a tool that they're going to be cursing for the next 2 years of a 3-year contract.
Exactly.
Bryan, you strike me as a smooth operator and a pretty good negotiator. Do you have any tips for finance people who may be buying software and going into a big negotiation with a vendor?
I would say that, when you're negotiating, there's sort of the hard cost and the economic cost of the deal, which there's so many resources out there today to kind of validate. I would encourage you to do that on the material things. So CFO networks are incredibly valuable. So if you don't have someone who's bought that tool before, find them, reach out to your investors, reach out to, second degree contacts. I think that's a really valuable way to just validate you're getting the right deal. I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is some of the softer parts of the deal, right? So, maybe you want a customer reference. For example, like when you're selling to a customer, but they're negotiating you, so I'm on the other side of the table. So a customer's negotiating price down and you're like, gosh, I got to the CFO. I really, you've gotten me so low. I mean, the only thing I could kind of do now is get something in return from you, which would you be willing to be a reference if I got you this really, really great price that we don't give to anyone, kind of a thing. So I think using some of those softer, non-financial tools are often interesting. But at the end of the day, I think it's, just trying to validate the economics are good through a network-based approach has been really helpful for me.
That's a really good point. And there's the old adage that no CFO ever got fired for buying IBM. And I do think that there's some truth in that you want to validate with your peers that something actually works, that they've purchased it. You don't want to be the first person to do it.
Yep.
Bryan, what I'm going to do is take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So you're a successful guy, but you got to give me one thing that you've screwed up on the job. It could be this job or another one throughout your career.
There's definitely people things that you do that you wish you had back. I would say the one thing that's kind of been really annoying is there's been a couple situations where me and my teams have kind of fallen victim to wire fraud, where someone really catches you changing vendor information. Thankfully, it hasn't been super material, But that's been something that's really been humbling because, when you lay out a control environment and want to do the right thing, the last thing you want to do is feel like you've gotten duped. And so that's one thing where I'd say I've learned a lot over the years and hopefully created a much more risk mitigated environment as a result of some of the prior mistakes.
It's big of you to admit that, because I know a lot of people that stuff has happened, and sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. But like the number of texts I got when I first, like the first 2 months of being a first time CFO, they must flag people on LinkedIn. Like the number of texts and emails that were all fake targeting me, it was like every day, at least 3 of them.
Yeah, no, I think CFOs, maybe second to CISOs become really adept at phishing and sensitivity to how people kind of do the social engineering and try to get at you. So I think over time you become a little bit tougher and resilient, but sometimes it's the result of a couple mistakes along the way.
Yeah, and enough shots on goal, eventually something slips by. Bryan, if you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
I think I would tell my younger self to not be afraid to raise their hand when opportunity presents itself. I think some of the best career experiences I've had haven't necessarily been when the company's been a home run, but it's been in situations where, I've been able to do things for the first time and someone gave me an opportunity to do that. And so sometimes it's raising your hand. Sometimes it's knowing that someone's asking you to raise your hand, and it could happen. And so I think that's really important. So that would be one of the top things. I mean, maybe the second thing would be find something that you're good at versus romanticizing about what you might love to do. I think oftentimes when you're good at something and you can achieve things, success or happiness is often a function of achievement. And so I think, finding what you're good at and then kind of going down that path is really important for folks.
It doesn't have to be your example in your life, but can you give an example of what that may look like? Trying to romanticize, like, I'm going to be a famous writer someday or something like that. And it's like, well, you're probably better at X, Y, or Z. And if you accomplish that, then you'll be pretty happy at it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of a good personal, like professional example. I mean, I guess at one point in time, I aspired to be, on Wall Street and be an analyst and do the whole CFA thing. And I went down that path for a brief period of time. And then I realized it just wasn't as much fun as some of the things I was experiencing. And so I sort of, was going down the path of B school, CFA at one point. And then the operating piece of what I was doing at the time, this is the late 90s, was so interesting. And I was in kind of a great position in the tech world that, I kind of kept doing that and sort of learning on the job, if you will. And that was ultimately the right decision for me.
I think there are also a lot of operators, I fall into this bucket, who thought like, oh, I'm going to be an investor and I want to try to go this VC or PE route. And then you find out either you don't enjoy it because you feel like a financial tourist, or you're not that good at it, which I was probably both. And then you say, I'm actually having a lot more fun and I can do more. Maybe the title is not as flashy, but like, I'll run this FP&A group. This is going to be awesome. And so that was my experience, at least. Yeah.
No, agreed. I love being an operator and ultimately being close to innovation and growth is I think really, really enriching.
Yeah. And you get to hang out with the sales guys. They have better parties. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools are you using today to get the job done?
Yeah. So on the tools side, let's see, we've got Salesforce CRM, NetSuite ERP, Soligo kind of brings them all together. ShareWorks cap management, Zip for procurement, Expensify, ADP for payroll, Flowcast for reconciliation, and SOX prep. Those are some of the key ones.
What's the most recent tool you bought?
The most recent tool was Zip for procurement orchestration.
Their name's been coming up a lot. Nice.
Yeah. They seem to be doing a nice job.
Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
I've been around for a while, so I've seen a lot. I would say the craziest thing. So years ago, I was at a SaaS business where we attended a conference in Vegas. And about a week after the conference was over, my controller comes up to me and says, so I want to show you an expense. And it happened to be an expense for like $4,000 in beverages. And let's just say my controller was suspicious that that's all it was for. And so we had we had a bunch of interesting discussions around that expense being submitted. And it was kind of an interesting week for us.
Yeah. I'm guessing it was at some sort of club where it was expensed. I got it. Yeah. Okay. Bryan, this has been a blast. You were very thoughtful, and I really appreciate you bringing all your career advice. This has been great.
CJ, really enjoyed it. Hope to connect in the future.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.